Hi everyone, welcome to the Good Podcast. I am Rob Watson and I've got a really interesting guest lined up for you today. His name is Marcus Pibworth, and I have known about Marcus for a few years. I came across him in the Positive News magazine, which I support through this podcast. And I was skipping through the magazine and I noticed Marcus lined up next to this pretty cool looking van, and also hearing that he had a podcast. And I'm pretty sure it was around about the time I was thinking about doing this podcast. And so I was interested in that. And then recently I've connected with him because he does a monthly men's group where we connect and we talk and we get to be open and vulnerable and talk about all sorts of things that's going on in our lives, and just it's a safe place to be. So I'm really enjoying them. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to speak with Marcus and to hear him. So first of all, Marcus, thank you for chatting with me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. It's exciting.
You're very welcome. So first of all, I know I've given a brief info about how I got connected with you and your background ever so slightly. If you could just give us a little bit of a little overview of what you kind of currently what your passions are, or what you've been doing in your life and stuff. And
yeah, certainly. Well, there's a few things that I could define myself as I guess the main thing I do in terms of passion, in terms of work at the moment, is storytelling. I'm a storyteller, and that informs a large part of what I do. The other thing which is very present right now is fatherhood, because I am the father of a nearly 10-month-old little girl, Freya. So I'm sure I know you're a father with a young child as well, so I'm sure you can relate to that sort of being quite encompassing of everything and taking up a lot of time, which is good in some ways and tiring. And so that and I guess they're the two main threads I'm following at the moment. And then obviously, like you said, I'm holding the men's group every month, and that's the online men's group, and that's the sort of free space for men to come and sort of share and be vulnerable, which I felt was important. And that sort of came out of firstly it came out of me wanting to have a space. It was also I was running some storytelling groups for men, and I felt that this would be a nice addition to that, to have a sort of free space that men could join every month, and just to know it was there every month. So they're really the threads of that. And it's interesting actually that we're talking, and you bring up the sort of the Positive News article. I can't remember when that was. I mean, it feels like a long time ago now. I guess it was quite a few years ago. I don't think I've been featured in any magazines since then. That was my glory days. Because I guess that's sort of the threads where all these threads started, really doing that project. It was called Ministry of Change, and like you said, I had a podcast and I lived in a van, and that really sort of was I guess it was a really big turning point. Starting that project led to me now, and we can go more into detail about that if you're interested.
I think I'd like to jump off at that point, really, because a few of the listeners will know that I'm currently converting a van ourselves, and excited about the possibilities of being on the open road and moving about quite freely, quite cost effective as well, really. And we'll see how it unfolds. So I'd like to know, a little bit more about that. So you lived in a van, and how far you travelled. Were you on your own? A little bit about that and how that kind of blended in with your podcast. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole living in the van thing, I mean, it originated because I was helping lead a project with a friend where we drove a group of sort of 19 to 21-year-olds around the UK for 6 weeks. And that was sort of part of, like, I was living in Brighton at the time, and I had this deep sense of sort of dissatisfaction, unsatisfied feeling of being there and everything that I was doing at the time. And I wanted to go and explore the country, and I wanted to also explore alternative ways of living. And I didn't have any sort of contacts into that world. and I was running an event, and I just sort of in the break time shared this sort of feeling with someone I knew that had visited. I'd just met, but they had, I think, cycled to a couple of different communities, like these intentional communities. And I really just said to her, sort of like, oh, I'd like to do that, but I don't really know how. And then I had a tap on the shoulder, and someone else I'd just met, it turned out that they were running this project and they needed someone to help them, and I did sort of and I think like, oh, but can I really? I've got like, a flat and a partner and a girlfriend and all the things tying me to a place. And in the end, I just thought, no, I have to do this. So I spent 6 weeks, and we had just borrowed a minibus, and we just drove all around the UK visiting really fascinating people. We went to incredible places. There's a place in Totnes called Schumacher College, and we met people like Satish Kumar and the storyteller Martin Shaw. We went to Stroud and met the eco-side lawyer Polly Higgins, who sadly passed away since then, and went to up to Scotland. So there's the Sami Ling Tibetan monastery, and it, like all these different places. And when I got back, I got back to Brighton after this, and I just thought, I can't go back to living in my apartment and doing this after seeing what is out there and seeing that there are different ways of living. And so I sort of left everything, and I bought a van. And I actually bought the first van I converted myself with my brother, who was training to be a carpenter. And I really just wanted to go out and explore. I didn't really have a plan. I'd been going through quite a serious phase of depression, and all I wanted to do was explore what that was. And I knew for me, and I can't speak for other people, I knew for me that it didn't feel medical. Like it felt like the environment I was in was not conducive to me being a good, sort of fulfilled human being. So I wanted to go and explore. So really, the van came out of this sort of desire to go and talk to people. And then the podcast also came out of that, because I felt at the time, I could just go and ask random people, can I talk to you about depression? But I felt it worked better if I had something to sort of a vehicle. I mean, the van, but also the podcast is sort of vehicle to sort of introduce myself, say I've got a project, rather than I'm just like someone that wants to chat. Like, I've got a project. And so I created this project, Ministry of Change. I got the van, converted it, and then just spent a lot of time driving around. Actually, it turned out to be nearly 3 years driving around the UK mostly. I did go on a bit of a foray once to Sweden and around sort of Northern Europe, but mainly it was in the UK. Just really recording conversations with people. And it started off recording conversations about depression, but really, really quickly realized that was sort of too narrow for what I wanted. And I started to realize that, everyone has a story. Everyone experiences difficult things in life. So I started just sort of meeting with, wherever I went, I basically put out a call via social media or by people I knew saying, I'm going to be here for 2 days, for a week, for a fortnight, and I'd like to meet people around there. And so that's sort of the way I got talking to people. Yeah, and then most of the time I lived in my van, and it was really good. I really enjoyed it. It was difficult sometimes, and especially at the beginning when I was still sort of working through quite a lot of stuff. I did remember feeling quite lonely, but I felt that was important to be with that loneliness. And actually that was sort of really transformational, to sit with that loneliness. If I don't know if that really makes sense but yeah. It does to me. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you want to know really about the van life, I guess.
Well, one thing interesting, it sounds, what I admire is you first going on that bus journey around the UK for 6 weeks, wherever it was, with on that project with young people. and then coming back and thinking, I've got to make this change, I've got to do something, but being brave enough to make it. And you said you had a girlfriend at the time, so, and it sounds like you traveled solo. So, that must have,
Yeah.
however that transformed to allow you to the flat and stuff like that. And I admire, because you could have gone back after those 6 weeks and thought, well, I've got a job, got a flat, live in Brighton, girlfriend, and go, well, this is just it type thing, back to it. That was a good little 6-week trip. And says, but you're like, no, it's sort of following. For me, it's about taking the road less traveled, being brave, knowing your head can come up with 1,000,001 reasons not to do it. And, but your heart was saying, I've got to do this. So I'd really admire that side of it.
Well, you know what? It was really difficult that time. The relationship ended, and I sort of left the flat we were sharing together and those things. But I feel it was sort of mutual. We sort of knew when I went away that things were right. And you know what? For maybe a year and a half before that point, I'd had this recurring just image in my head constantly that I wanted to take all my belongings outside and just get a sledgehammer and smash everything. I just wanted to smash everything up. And there was this period for, probably like the first year, I guess, of living in the van. I didn't know exactly the time, where I just didn't know, was it a mistake? Like, will I look back on this and think, oh my God, what have I done? Or will I look back on this point and think that was the turning point, that was the point that I did something? And I really didn't know. And it got probably like close to a year where I sort of looked and saw, like, interestingly, I felt like I had I'd always imagined physically destroying my life with a sledgehammer, and I realized I'd sort of metaphorically done that, and it was so liberating. And I felt after some time passed, I could clearly see that it was the right path. I'd made a decision which I didn't regret, and I still don't regret it. I can't imagine what life would have been like if I'd just come back and continued. But it wasn't easy, and it's still not easy all the time now. But definitely, I feel like I've I have this feeling now that when stuff isn't so easy, that at least I'm chosen this way, not just sort of going along like I feel like I was before, just like doing what I thought I needed to do. And then when you feel miserable, you think, well, like, I'm just miserable, and there's no sort of silver lining. There's nothing that I'm doing that I'm really that invested in. But I think once you've chosen your own path, even when stuff gets difficult and there's bad days, I have the sense, well, at least this is what I want to be doing.
Yeah. And just that element where you're saying, how doing that metaphorically, putting a hammer to your old life by going doing that, but that element, of feeling liberated, because I think a lot of us can feel that we are tethered to a lot of the conditioning from society that has been drummed into us basically from childhood, of what a life looks like, what success looks like, how you should be, and it does take bravery, and you do have to basically put a hammer to that idea, don't you? And be like, actually, no, I'm going to break free from that. And you get an opportunity to see that there's another way, there's a different way, there can be a better way. It's challenging. And like you said, you're questioning stuff, but often we're questioning stuff because I feel anyway that I'm getting pushed to my edges. And when you go into your edges, it's uncomfortable and you don't want to, and sometimes often we'll retreat because that's the bit. But actually, as you mentioned, that liberating, often when you push through that, there is freedom at times on the other side of that. And I for me, like I think what's maybe inspired us with the van potentially. Like, now I don't know how far we're going to go with it. You're in a different position back then. You didn't have your wife. You didn't have your young daughter. It may not be as simple to just say, I'm going to go live in a van for 3 years. When, I couldn't really imagine living full time with me and Ruth and Stella in a van, but especially not in the UK in these winter months. and how the wind has been recently. So yeah, I've been inspired by quite a few. There's certain documentaries and films, but there's one particular film, Captain Fantastic.
Oh yeah, Captain Fantastic's basically I mean, I love that film. You mean the film?
Yeah, the film.
Oh no, there's a documentary as well. I think there might be. I'm not sure.
Is there a documentary? Is it actually based on anyone's story?
Maybe I'm getting that wrong. Anyway, I don't know the film. I love that film. Incredible film.
Yeah.
I mean, I think me and my wife at the moment are trying to sort of think about the next step with our little family, and definitely there's the sort of thoughts of that film come into my mind quite a lot when we're trying to sort of have a think about what we want for our family. I don't think probably quite as extreme as that, but definitely taking elements of that.
I think in that film, we talk about it. The ideal scenario is actually how he ends up, and where he's kind of had a little bit of a middle ground. Anyone who's not watched the film, to start off with, he's basically living in a forest with about his 7 kids. Everything's wild, homeschooling, everything, incredible children. But at the end, they kind of have a halfway house, so it looks like they have a home. The bus that they lived in has been kind of converted into a chicken coop. Some of the kids go to the local school, and I think I like the element of it, because even now, like I don't know, we'll get onto this with fatherhood and stuff, and maybe that's how we'll move into it now. Is like it's really challenging, and parenthood generally, and particularly for the mother, in many ways, because they're carrying it, the birth. Wow, the respect that you have for the lady in our lives when you see what they go through and how they bring that through, it's mind-blowing. Like, it's the most creative thing. I'm a creative, and I can create stuff in the world, but there's nothing even comes close to being able to create a child like that. But moving on from that, it's challenging to look at the way we live. We live on these, we live in these streets, we live in these houses, and it can feel very segregated, very separated. And it feels to me, I very much tune more into, say, maybe how Native American tribes would live, or other tribes. There'd be probably about 150 in those tribes. It takes like a village to raise. I always think about that phrase, like, it takes a village to raise a child, and you just think how rich that must be. And I don't think we're going to go living in the woods with 150 people, but we may move into some sort of community. Maybe it's like a co-housing or some sort of community hub, where it's a space where you can come and connect. Like, I know my wife found it some challenges sometimes. Like, it can be lonely. You talking about loneliness sometimes in a van on that first year, but it can also be lonely being a parent at times, especially if all your other people or your friends, maybe their kids they're older, or they've not got kids yet, and they don't quite grasp what you're going through. I'll leave that a little bit there and see what you want to open up to.
Yeah, I mean, the parenthood thing is interesting, isn't it? I mean, as I said, because I'm a new parent, it's been, I mean, this year, and the build up to it it's all been about fatherhood and parenthood. And yeah, I mean, I think definitely loneliness comes into it. I mean, I found as a father, I mean, me and my wife moved sort of back to the area where my family are from, just not necessarily intentionally, just because we have a baby and we had nowhere to be, and lockdown and stuff was happening, and so we sort of found ourselves there. And it's been this time, there's literally been isolation because people have been told they're not allowed out of their house. So, and then at the same time, I think parenthood anyway probably has elements of isolation anyway, because you're sort of going through this big transition into a different way of living. And I certainly found that me and my wife, where we are, haven't had a huge amount of contact with other parents, or especially not new parents. There's maybe sort of people with lots of experience of, sort of that have grown up kids and stuff, but less so we've had contact with mothers and fathers sort of our own age, with our own sort of going through a similar thing, and I think that's been difficult for both of us. I mean, I've started only last a few weeks ago, me and another friend who's a storyteller in Belgium, we started doing this storytelling space for fathers, specifically for fathers. And that really came out of the fact that both of us, he was at his house in Belgium with a baby 2 months older than mine, and I was here in England in the same situation, and realizing that both of us were in a similar situation where we didn't, the closest we were, he was the father I spoke to most, and he was in Belgium, and I was the, yeah, vice versa. And we felt like, okay, there's probably a lot of people like this. And as we're both storytellers, we'd for a couple of years been throwing around sort of ideas of doing something together, and this felt like, oh, hang on, this is the time, it's just arrived. So we started this space, Mythic Fathers, which is really a space for fathers to come together every month. It's a free space, and it's just to like, either Yappa or I will tell a story, and then we sort of use that as a jumping off point to reflect on our own experiences being a father. And again, like with all the work that I do, really, it always stems out of, I want this, I want to do this because I need it. You know, I need the work I've done before. I did a lot of work with sort of men's group and storytelling because I wanted a men's group. The men's group we talked about at the beginning, the monthly one, is because at the time I didn't have a fixed location, and I wanted to be part of a men's group, and I couldn't really find anything that I could be part of. So I thought I'll start an online one. And, you know, I think that's, and the fatherhood workshops as well, the storytelling for fathers, Mythic Fathers it's called. That's again, it springs out of a need to connect with other fathers. And yeah, fatherhood's an interesting one, isn't it? It sort of flips your whole world upside down. It's really sort of wonderful, beautiful, joyous, and at the same time it's confusing, always. And every day is learning, but in a different way. You know, I had this sort of idea at one point that you need to sort of, before I have children, I need to sort of have sorted everything out. And then you get to a point where you realize you're never going to sort anything out. So we decided to have a child anyway. And then I realized that I'm not the one that needs to teach her things. And in fact, she has so much wisdom. And the very first time I looked into her eyes, just sort of holding her, I just thought, oh, I've got this all wrong. Like I thought she would know nothing, and I'd have to fill her with knowledge. And I now look into her eyes and realize I know nothing, and she needs to fill me with knowledge. And you know, every day of sort of trying my best, make mistakes, and then carry on and learn from them, and sort of try not to make the same mistakes again, or at least make them in a different way. And I think we chatted about this before, actually, maybe in a separate time, about realizing that it's not about not making mistakes. It's about handling sort of those mistakes. It's about sort of standing by them and sort of learning, and it's what you do to help your child. I think the story I shared with you was when the first time I made my daughter cry. She was tiny, and I walked out of the door and forgot to gauge that there was a tiny little hand now on the edge of my arm, and I brushed too close and caught her. It squished her hand in between the door and the door frame, and she started crying. She did one of those sort of, I don't know if you have children, you probably know this look, where she didn't cry, she just opened her eyes really wide and had her mouth open for what seemed like an eternity, and then her eyes sort of went into little slits, and was just like the most, you know, heartbreakingly loud cry. And I thought I did that, and it really affected me at the time. It was really, and it was only through sort of speaking to other fathers and other people, not just fathers, that sort of made me realize that, oh, these things are going to happen, and obviously that was completely unintentional. I didn't want to hurt my daughter, but I accidentally did. But it's about how you sort of go through that, and how you look after your child in that situation, and how you sort of learn just to stand a little bit further away from the door when you walk through the next time, and those sort of things. And we're always going to make mistakes as humans, and so you can't not make mistakes. I mean, you can try, but you're not going to succeed.
Yeah, I think if we go about life thinking we're not going to make mistakes, then we're not really going to do much with our life. We're going to be in a place of, not trying, because, I remember you telling me that story about when you caught your little daughter's hand, and I think I shared then in response to that, the time when I think I had made porridge for my daughter, and I tasted it was fine for me, but I didn't, and then I gave it to her and it was too hot, and I was burning her mouth. I could see she was in like a lot of discomfort, and just seeing that look on her face, and thinking, I've done that, and like, God, but yeah, you definitely learn along the way. And I think it's good just to be open to just talk about these things, because sometimes I speak to some people and they're either super mum and dad, or they're just lying through the teeth that everything's fine, And it's interesting. I think we went to something at the weekend. That was what it was. We've had a couple of pretty rough nights with our daughter. She's had some colds and croup and stuff like that. And, we're getting like 2-3 hours sleep. I think I said to you before we come on, I almost pulled the plug on this chat today because I've had about 5 hours sleep over the course of 2 days, and just up with the daughter and stuff. And we went out on summer last Saturday, and we managed to use the term like pull ourselves together and look pretty respectable and pull like clean and well dressed and stuff, and probably look like, look at them with their daughter. And I'm like, you don't even know the half of it. And look around at other parents as well, they've managed to, and it's such a, it's like, obviously we're going to I'll generally have a shower before I'll go out into public, or get dressed well or something like that if I can. But I think it's really important to open up, because it's definitely, being a father is the most incredible thing, the most rewarding, most special thing, seeing that little bundle of joy. Now our daughter's 16 months and she's starting to walk and she's talking, and each day she's learning something new. It's beautiful to see, but it's also it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my entire life. Absolutely. I'm going to be 42 in a couple of weeks, and I had it easy before she came along. I had a charmed life, but obviously I would not swap anything at all. But you realize from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep, and then if they keep waking up, you've got to be there, and you're going to be there with them for many years. But it's also so beautiful. And as you said, I loved what you said about you're going to learn more from them than you can pass on. And I've spoken about that in this podcast about, I said that actually to my daughter. My wife had to go off, and I had her with me for about 30 minutes. I had my shirt open and she was just tucked in on my chest and tucking her asleep. And I just had this first opportunity to connect with her and speak to her. And I was just saying, like, I'm just going to do my best to be here to kind of, guide you and help you. But I know that you're going to teach me far more than I can possibly think. And I'm going to do my best to help you remember who you are and where you've come from. And it's so true. And I think the term, someone that I saw the other week, and they basically used this term, becoming a father, or even actually having a daughter, who used the term of, it makes a man out of you. And I feel like that's happening for me. Like, I can see that. Like, I'm in my 40s now, and maybe I'm starting to become more of a man rather than more than a boy in some ways, or become much more mature. So it's a beautiful dance, and it's messy, and it's the unpredictability of it. Like in my life before it, I could have a semblance of like control, or knowing that if I did this and this and this, it would lead to something. But with her around, it can just, everything can go out the window, completely. And you've got to be open to I use a term like expect the unexpected with it, and it's kind of one of the greatest spiritual lessons really for me to truly surrender and just accept what is. Like if we're up in the middle of last night and she was waking up over and over, and she's either on my wife or coming over to me to be settled, and all you want to do is just lie down and sleep. It's like, well, no, this is the way it is now. I can't change this moment so much. I just have to be with it. So yeah, it's beautiful. One thing I'd love to go on a little bit more about is talk about the storytelling. And if you've got a story now that you can open up to, great, but you don't have to if anything pops to mind. Or you can just tell us a little bit more about how that kind of came about, the gift of storytelling or the passion for it, and how that creative. I often think of something like that, of being that creative, having that creative outlet, and how important that is.
Yeah, well, the storytelling itself, it came out of, I've always enjoyed sort of writing and that sort of thing, but the storytelling in the way I do it now, sort of oral storytelling, it really came out of that journey, the Ministry of Change, the mental health stuff, I started talking about my own journey, my own story, my own sort of experiences with my mental health in a very, in a autobiographical, be invited sometimes to events and go and talk about sort of that journey, what the sort of experiences I had and how I navigated it. And after a couple of years of doing that, I got to this point where I just felt like, okay, I know it's helpful to people, but it doesn't feel like it's helpful to me anymore. Talking in that capacity, it felt like almost like I'd sort of turned a corner. It felt sort of quite distant, and I felt like I want something, there's something more I can do here. And I'd sort of had these sort of ideas around, I'd like to tell story. I liked stories, but I didn't really have this understanding of how that could fit in. And then I started meeting a few people that were storytellers. They said, so what do you do? I'm a storyteller. And a few people had said to me, oh, you're a storyteller. And I felt like, oh no, I don't know if I really am. I'm worried that I might meet one of these people that are a storyteller and they will sort of question me and catch me out and realize that I hadn't sort of, got a PhD in storytelling or whatever I believed you need to do. But then I started sort of coming across different people that were storytellers and speaking to them and realizing that there is an incredible power in those old stories that sort of, in a way, they're magical, and they have a lot of answers, but more importantly, they have a lot of questions. They help question, and a lot of these stories have come down, for thousands of years or hundreds of years, or maybe some of them like really far back, and they all contain nuggets of human wisdom in them. And then I came across different people. There's a well-known storyteller in the UK called Martin Shaw. There's a whole movement in America from the sort of late 80s, 90s of storytellers. There's a guy called Robert Bly who just passed away just before Christmas, I think. He was about 90, I think, when he died. And another storyteller or mythologist called Michael Mead. And they're all using these old tales to help people dig into their life, to sort of unpack what there's going on. And obviously there's people like Joseph Campbell who wrote this. I don't know if I'm sure a lot of people will have come across it, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is sort of like the hero's journey. And there's a lot about archetypes and that sort of thing. It's like people going on a journey and overcoming obstacles. And I started to see, oh, hang on, this really appeals to me. This really feels right. And so, and then I found that there's a place called Emerson College in East Sussex, and it has a place called the International School of Storytelling. And I that project I talked about before with the young people in the minibus, that had been, I'd done that with someone that had been part of that community there, and people had kept pointing me in that direction, and eventually I found myself at the School of Storytelling, and really through that place discovering this medicinal power that could be held in the words of the stories. And so I moved more away from telling my own story just outright, and more into, okay, how can I present a story and allow the story to do the sort of work. Really, the stories contain all they need to contain, and you, as a storyteller, you, as with, I think it sort of works with any sort of creative pursuit, you become like the channel for something that already exists, which is much higher. And I think anyone that's creative in some way will know that. You know, you sit down and think, right now I want to write a poem, and I want it to be beautiful, and I want it to contain this theme, and this theme. You sit down and spend, you know, a week going back and forth over the lines of this. Well, this is my experience anyway. And then you're out walking in a field, and suddenly the whole poem just arrives in your head, and you haven't done any work. It's almost like it's come from a different place. And I think the stories, I feel like that as well. They exist around you, and you just need to sort of channel them out. And there's a beautiful story that it's actually, I could share a story here, which a friend of mine, a mentor, Roy Galore, he's a wonderful storyteller, and he told me the story once, and it's about an archer. Are you ready for the story? But
I am.
They'd like to just
I am always
spring a story on someone. Yeah, it's really short, but there's an archer, and he's really good at archery. Really, like, he wins all the competitions in the kingdom, and it gets to the point where he's just got no one to compete against. There's no one that comes anywhere near his standard. And he thinks, right, I'm going to go out and I'm going to explore, and I'm going to find someone to sort of match me. I want to find someone to really give me a good sort of competition with. And so he starts traveling around to sort of different kingdoms, different places, and everywhere he goes, he enters the archery competitions or whatever, and he wins all of them. And he never in any of these travels finds anyone that comes anywhere close to his skill at archery. And so he, you know, he's downhearted, and he decides, I'm just going to give up and go back. I have to just go back home. And he travels a long way, and on his way back, he passes through this village, which he hadn't seen before. And as he's walking along, he starts to see these little red targets everywhere, like on trees, on the doors, wooden walls of houses, and all of these little red targets, they have an arrow right through the bullseye. And he thinks, this is incredible. He said, after all this searching, I've eventually found it. I've found the archer that can match my skill. And he starts asking people, where is this famous archer that lives in your village? And they said, oh, famous archer? We don't have a famous archer living here. And he asks everyone, and no one knows. And he sits down, he breathes out, sits down with a sigh on the bench, and an old woman walks past, and he says, do you know where this archer is? And she looks a bit confused at first, and she smiles and says, oh yeah, I do, wait here, I'm going to go and get them. And she goes off. She's quite a long time, and he thinks maybe she's not coming back. And then he sees her, and to his surprise, skipping along behind her is a tiny little girl, and this little girl has a little bow. She has a little quiver of arrows on her back. He's skipping along. He thinks, this, I just don't understand. I've trained for years to get this. But as he watches, this little girl reaches in her quiver, and she takes out an arrow and thumbles it into the string, and she pulls it back, and she fires. And it goes straight across, and it goes boom into a tree. And then he watches as she skips over, and she gets to the tree, and she reaches in her pocket and pulls out a red chalk and draws the target around the arrow. And yeah, that's rather than me sort of explaining how the stories work, I feel that story, as a storyteller, you fire an arrow, but the people listening, they will have their own red chalk, and they draw the target themselves. So I think that's why the stories are magic. I found in the men's group and in this Mythic Fathers group, I do one called Stories for Men and one called Mythic Fathers, and they're both sort of the same format. Tell a story. It's too long to share one here. They're usually about sort of half an hour at least, the stories, but they stop and break, tell 10 minutes and then have a sort of discussion and go back into the story. And it's incredible because I can spend ages preparing the stories, working on the story, trying to find the sort of symbolism and meaning in the story, and then I tell it and all the people have seen something completely different, and that's wonderful. And so I feel that's why I feel so passionate about storytelling in this space of sort of mental health and vulnerability and opening up, because I think it can reach people in much deeper ways than just saying, right, tell me everything that's going on in your life, because that's causes people to freeze and panic.
I really appreciate you sharing that story. Like, something about stories as well, like they capture your imagination. So as you're chatting through that, I'm going on this journey. I'm imagining it. My imagination is running wild. Imagine this guy moving from his kingdom, going from place to place in search and stuff like that, and all across. And something that I find beautiful about stories, it allows you to be present and just be in the moment to listen. And I imagine, as you're saying that we're around a campfire, and it's gone dark, and we can see the stars and stuff, and we're just listening. It's just going round from each person, and yeah, I can really I can massively see the benefits and all that. It's beautiful. And so you say some of the 30 minutes ones, you'll come to, well, your own stories, it's your own imaginations. Like you said, you're tapping into something else. Is it that, or sometimes you sharing another story that that you've heard?
Oh no, most of the time it's not. I don't write the stories. It's sometimes, but mostly it's I tell folk tales or fairy tales quite often. Usually phrase it wonder tale, because that's tends to not scare men off too much. But tell like
wonder tale.
in those wonder tale. That's I think the sort of more grown up terminology for fairy tale, basically. I tell like a Brothers Grimm. Essentially, my job at the moment is getting a group of grown men to sit around and listen to fairy tales and talk about the sort of deeper things in life, which is wonderful. Yeah. But sometimes have to sort of mask it in more sort of language of mythology, because I don't know, people have connotations of what the story. Like, so often when people hear I'm a storyteller, they say, so what do? You tell stories to kids? And I'm like, well, actually I have sometimes recently told stories to kids, but only really since I've become a father. And I haven't really got much experience telling stories to kids. I feel like I tell stories to, Brothers Grimm story to a grown man is much more, I feel that's much more, I'm not going to say in my comfort zone, but much more in my, that's what I want to do. I think that's my passion, my area of passion. And yeah, so no, anyway, to answer your question, they're mostly myths and stories that exist already. Yeah.
I remember you telling a real story in one of our men's groups about I was completely captivated by it. Were you on a bike? Was it a bike? Or
oh yeah.
Were you in the Far East somewhere? Or?
Yes, no, I know which story. It was when I was living in Beijing, and Actually, the story I have been trying to work this story into a longer one, because sometimes what I do is we'll tell a myth or a myth or a folk tale and weave in personal experiences in between it, and that's really powerful. And I haven't actually managed to do that successfully with this one yet, but the story, without the story itself, I can tell it's, and I know, I mean, yeah, basically I was living in China. I lived in China for about 5 years in total, 4.5 years, various different places. And there was a period while I was there where definitely everything was not going well. I would say I was having like quite, I guess like this was an early episode of quite severe depression. I don't know if I could say bordering on like psychosis, but I was having like images of like a sort of a life that I should be living quite clearly running alongside the life I was living. And I was sort of really struggling, getting to the point where I just didn't know what to do at all. And the story is, it basically, one day I felt so stuck. I was felt in China as well. I was a long way from you. I didn't really know what to do. And I just had this feeling over and over again that I wasn't meant to be here, that I was in the wrong, I was born by accident, or I can't really explain it, just this real sense that I am not meant to be on this planet. And one day I just thought, you know what, I need to work out if I should be here or not. And I got on my bike, and I was in like, obviously quite a frantic mood. And I just got on my bike and I knew where I wanted to be. It was about, about half an hour journey away. And I just cycled and I cycled and I cycled. And at that point I thought, if I get to the destination, then that's a sign I'm meant to be here. And I cycled. It was horrendously dangerous, and I do not recommend this necessarily, but I just cycled and I cycled. At some points I closed my eyes. I didn't stop for any red lights. I had to swerve around cars and pedestrians and things. It was, and I got there. I got to the place I had in mind, the destination, and I got off my bike, and I just went upstairs I was back to my flat, and I just felt incredible. I've had this real sense of ecstasy, and for about a year I would say I didn't feel miserable. I felt, maybe not quite, maybe 6 months or something, I felt, all that was just in the back past, and now I'm a functioning human being. I mean, in hindsight, looking back, it totally, definitely wasn't the case. I think it was a plaster over a deep wound that needed a lot of healing, a lot of medicine, and still working on that now, because, those feelings came back. And but yeah, I mean, I guess it was a desperate person's attempt to find some meaning. I don't know what you feel when you hear that. I mean, I actually forgot, that wasn't in my mind. I was having a therapy session a couple of years ago now, and suddenly, while I was talking in that therapy session, I suddenly remembered that bike ride. And I don't think even afterwards, that feeling of like, oh, everything is fine, that I felt momentarily after that, I wasn't conscious of that. It was only looking back, sort of 5 years later, when that memory came back, that I could sort of see all that, but also clearly see that it wasn't the answer to my problems. And actually, when you have some deep sort of issues going on, the thing to do isn't do a suicidal bike ride. It is to sort of, well, for me, talk about it, and I would assume for most people, talking about it.
Yeah, it really captivated me, listening to it and seeing it was kind of just throwing, two sheets to the wind and thinking, so be it. if I'm supposed to make it to the other side, then I will. And by hell or high water, you made it through red lights, through dodging traffic and zipping around. I suppose it's another one of them. It captured my imagination. I'm there with you on that bike. You know, I must see like a short film made out of it at some point.
I think it's powerful, and I guess that's why I'm still working out how to tell it in another capacity. I guess my worry is with that story that someone thinks that I'm advocating doing that.
Just go do something crazy. Yeah,
like,
and
I
then you've
feel
got
like
someone's mother
crap.
who gets in touch with you. And
yeah, and I'm not at all. I think it was like completely ridiculous. I mean, it was a stupid thing to do in hindsight, really. But I mean, when you're in times of desperation, I wouldn't have been listening to anything like that. At that point, I was like quite locked into my own sort of darkness, I guess. But anyway, I guess the thing I was just saying is just that I'm not advocating doing that.
Yeah.
So please do not do that.
And myself as well, to anyone listening, not thinking, go and do something totally insane. But so talking about mental health, then you mentioned that was something that it was like a bandage over it, but it certainly gave you a release in somewhat for a period of time, whether it was 6 months or a year. What has helped you with your own mental health? You mentioned a therapy session a while ago. What I'm interested to know. I've got my own perspective on that, but I'd love to hear, because we've all got our own. There's some people might go off into the woods and do a ayahuasca ceremony for 2 weeks, or other people but your perspective or what's really helped you.
Well, I guess actually, and looking at it in that light, I see that story just told was part of the sort of me before I discovered anything that would help. At that time I was also self-medicating with alcohol then, definitely, and previous to that I had sort of drugs and those sort of things, and just pretty much having quite a hedonistic lifestyle to try and cover up the hurt and the pain and of depression. So I guess that bike ride I would classify in that sort of self-medicating unhealthily category. And they all, like drinking and drugs and that sort of thing, they do sort of, they are a temporary fix for pain, but they're not one that is healthy or actually gets you through it. It just covers it up. And I think that's the thing. Well, so the thing the big thing that helped me was stopping that. I don't drink alcohol anymore, or take any sort of drug. I don't take anything because I felt that how can I be conscious of how I want to be in the world if I'm not clear in my mind? And also, it's just, if you have depressive tendencies, alcohol is a massive depressant, so it's not helpful. So that was a really big step. Therapy. I've done over the years quite a lot of therapy, talking therapies, and meditation, that sort of thing. Being outside really helps me. I try and live a life that involves being outside as much as possible. I do at the moment live in the countryside and spend a lot of time outside. And just being creative, doing like art and things like that is really important to me. And mainly the thing I work on so much, and I still have to work on so much more, is to just not care what other people think. And it's really difficult. I feel for me, maybe that feels like that's the sort of the big one for living the life you need to live, is to not care what other people think. And I'm much better at that now than I ever was before, but still I catch myself wondering, or should I do this, or will that sort of what will someone else think if I do that? And that's really unhelpful. You know, living your life thinking, how do I please or impress someone else, is guaranteed to take you off the path to living the best life you can. But it's so hard. If you have the answer to that, send it my way. Answers on a postcard, please. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways. And I guess the thing that I find, I always say this when I do the men's group, I sort of try to sort of ask people not to give advice unless advice is asked for, because I find generally it's really unhelpful to tell people when they're facing a problem just to launch into what helped you. So I guess the point isn't, and I know you believe this as well, the point isn't to say that, oh no, going outside will help you, or doing this. It's to say that this helped me and you will find your way, and your way exists, and it's probably totally different. You know, like often people have sort of, when I was living in the van doing the mental health thing, they said, would you recommend doing this? And I'm like, well, yes, I would recommend sort of throwing off the shackles of a life you don't like and going and living in a van because it works for me. But I would recommend it for me. But I'm not going to tell you to do that, because in 6 months' time, I'll get a phone call and say, I'm living in a van and I'm parked in a field and I'm miserable and I hate it and I miss my life. And why did you tell me to do this? And like, yeah, because it's not, I can't tell you what, I don't know enough about anyone apart from me, and I barely know enough about myself. Yeah. So, yeah, but anyway, those are some of the things that help me. And
for me,
if you're listening, maybe that'll help you. Maybe it'll make you feel angry.
No. The thing that comes for me more than anything is the vulnerability to express how you feel. And you're talking about mental health and depression in your life. And I think the more men, particularly, that can open up and speak about this, it's not really about saying what the solutions are. In a way, the solution is us just talking, is us being open enough to talking about it. And for someone else to listen to and go, Jesus Christ, someone else feels the same as me. Someone else is going through those same feelings. You know, you look at, like, in our age group, it's the suicide rates in men in, you know, the 20 to 40 bracket. You know, it's really, it's worrying. It's a worrying sign. And I often think if more of us are, it brings me back to that term, you know, big boys don't cry. And we're sort of, that's ingrained in us from such an early age, because we need to be strong. We need to stand up for ourselves. So anytime emotions come up for us, it's like, you know, just push them, get down. Like, for instance, if you see a 3 or 4 year old boy or girl, you know, the boy's going to cry just as much as the girl. You know, it's like, there's no saying, you know, just, you know, come on, big boys don't cry. And from that moment, that's just letting you know it's not okay to feel your feelings, to not express how you're feeling. And each time that happens, it just gets pushed down, and then layer upon layer. And if we're not careful, we'll never actually find how far that's been pushed down, because we just end up walking around feeling numb or in pain, walking around in pain.
I think that's like, if we go, remember when we earlier we talked about that sort of difference between like sort of the metaphorical smashing up of your life and the sort of the actual physical, in terms of sort of possessions and belongings and that sort of thing. But actually, one of the things which I realized at that time, those years ago when I sort of made these changes, was that, I mean, that sort of those suicide statistics around men and stuff, they really were one of the things that drove the project I was doing, and still informs the sort of men's work I do today, because there was a time when I was living in Brighton which I felt really suicidal. And I mean, I've talked about it. This isn't a revelation. I've talked about it and created stories around that. And I realized at some point I'd had this sort of the recurring idea that, like, of death, of needing to die or something. And I realized that I had a very narrow view, and actually something did need to die, but it wasn't a physical death. It was a metaphorical death. It was I need to let go of this person that I'm trying to hold on to, that is not allowing me to be the person I need to be. And it was an incredible revelation for me at the time. And still, I mean, it's still important that, that, yeah, actually there was a death involved, but it certainly wasn't the final ultimate one that I had in mind, and that leads a lot of men and women, but men statistically like more likely to suicide and things like that. And yeah, I think talking helps you let go of that person, let go of the pain, and allows you to, I don't know how to term it, to sort of, to be sort of a rebirth, like a renaissance of yourself into a new form. And then you realize at some point you need to let that person go as well. And it's this constant cycle of sort of life and death, I guess, of letting the part of you that needs to die and to be reborn as the new version of yourself. And that's one of the strongest revelations I've read. And I think that's one of the reasons why I found being in nature really helpful, because you see, if you spend enough time outside, you see the cycles of nature doing exactly that, dying and being reborn over and over again. And realize that's like the law of the universe all around us. You can see it in nature, and it's true to us as well. But it's not, I mean, ultimately in the end it's obviously a physical thing, but we need to practice through our metaphorical ones first, and hopefully for as long as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say I acknowledge you really, and really appreciate what you're doing. Like, I very much get a lot out of the men's groups that I think I've maybe I started maybe towards the end of last year, and maybe I've come to about 3 or 4, and I just love the opportunity to have a safe space. And I think particularly during the lockdowns and stuff, and you realize how isolated we were, and how alone we could feel, and how and the thing for me, what it can do is us going for what we have done the past few years. It's really allowing us to recognize what's really important for us and what we need in our lives. Most of us have all these wants, but what is it that we actually need? And for me, it's connection is so important, to be with people who will listen to me. Because I think that's the great thing about often, I think Eckhart Tolle will talk about it often, we'll be in conversations and we're already thinking of the next thing. We're just going to jump in and say, I need to get my part of that story. But when someone's truly listening to you, you can see it them in. They just got that presence. And that's why it's great if you go to therapy or counselors and stuff, if you can get a really good one who allows you just to be in that presence, for you just to be for those moments and just to feel heard, is much needed. And that's what I very much get out of it. And I feel like we could probably maybe there's a round 2 of this podcast at some point, and maybe we'll do one in person. I very much want to meet you in person. I think that's the thing as well that's come off the back of it. And we've spoken, maybe we can touch on it, about community. And I think we've both got a bit of a drawing to the Welsh hills at some point, like feeling, I don't know if it's Pembrokeshire or North Wales or Snowdonia or that area in the centre down the bottom. I can't remember the area.
Monmouthshire, yeah.
Pardon?
Me and my wife just been around Wales exploring. We've been to around Pembrokeshire and the Brecon Beacons and stuff. So yeah, we'll find anyway. We will meet in person. Maybe when your van is ready, you can come and stay with us.
That sounds good. I'll definitely.
Well, you can come and stay with us without your van. But
yeah. And could you share then?
You want somewhere to take your van.
Yeah. You mentioned about if you could just give a little bit of a recap or overview of the things that you've got coming up, how if they listen to this wanting to maybe tap into one of the events or something, that'd be really great, and what they are and actually how they can find them.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to find out is through my website, which is my name, www.marcuspibworth.com. And then I also, or Instagram is probably the other best place, which is Marcus Pibworth Storyteller. And I'll post things on there. Coming up, the next thing is on the 10th of March. We have the second Mythic Fathers. I don't know when this is going out. So 10th of March is Mythic Fathers, and then Mythic Fathers will happen hopefully the first week of every month, around the first week of every month. So that's a space for fathers specifically to storytelling, share a myth, and do some of what we talked about earlier, sort of stopping the stories and reflecting. I have got some stories for men coming up, but I haven't set the dates yet, so check the website. And then at the last Tuesday of every month is the free men's group we do via Zoom, so any men that are listening are welcome to get in touch. I do also tell stories not for men, by the way, I guess that's the sort of the area that I've been focusing on. As I said, like, I create the spaces I feel like I need. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, Marcus, for your willingness to show up and to be brave and to be vulnerable and to take the road less traveled at times, and to break free of those, that old self, to realize what's actually possible, and to enjoy that. So I really appreciate you inspire me, so thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me.
There is my chat with Marcus Pibworth all wrapped up. Fascinating guy, fascinating storyteller, fascinating story to his life, and I hope you enjoyed that one. And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend. If you're listening to it on Apple Podcasts, I'd really appreciate a review. That would be amazing. And thank you as always for tuning in. I really appreciate each and every one of you. And until next time, have a good one.